Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 365, How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 2. How Purpose Guards Us from the Spirit of Noncompliance. The podcast objectives are: analyze how King Saul failed the test of noncompliance, analyze how Daniel the prophet passed the test of noncompliance, and analyze the process in which humility turns into insecurity. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. To live a life of purpose. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 124 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we initiated our analyses of the evolution of disobedience in the mind, revealing how noncompliance corrupts our physical mind, specifically our planning zone. We will continue this analysis in today's podcast by reviewing one of the more powerful and depressing examples of noncompliance in the scriptures. To wit, we will analyze how this virus destroyed the spiritual career and physical life of Saul, the first king of the former nation of Israel. In doing so, I would ask you to take a few minutes to read 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 26 before proceeding. Now, the first thing that comes to mind after reading this passage of scripture is sure, what a disastrous end for the first king of the former nation of Israel. Not only this, but of the 80 degrees of lawlessness, the one that sank his spiritual ship was disobedience. To make matters worse, the occasion of disobedience, recorded in 1 Samuel 15, wasn't the first in Saul's life. Quite the contrary, it was one of many, and it was his last as the king of Israel, ordained by Elohim. For immediately after this episode, Yahuwah sent Samuel to anoint David as the next king of Israel. As it so happens, we can use this disastrous episode in Saul's life to understand the impact of the 3 degrees of disobedience. To wit, from this failure, we can understand the impact of noncompliance, nonconformance, and complacency. Commencing with noncompliance, we see this degree of lawlessness at work from the very beginning, namely when Saul spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the cattle, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good. Alas, he would not put them under the ban as he was commanded. And yet, he did follow the command as it pertains to everything that was despised and considered worthless. These were put under the ban. Now, the fact that Saul and the people took these actions reveals a key finding you must pay attention to, for it speaks to my prior assertion that our assemblies are filled with men and women who are daily living in noncompliance. Consider this: the fact that Saul and the people did not wholly obey the word of Elohim is evidence they were planning to disobey all along. The key word being planning. We know this because when you are sold on the vision the Father reveals to you, the output of your planning zone will naturally align with that vision. Ergo, you cannot execute contrary to the vision for the simple fact that your plans were aligned with the vision from the start. Here again, this is how a healthy thought dimension works. This is how Elohim designed our minds such that we would reach a spiritual plane where we always follow his will. And yet, he also gave us the freedom of choice. Ergo, we, like Saul, have the option not to comply. That being said, the question of the hour is this: how do we ensure that we do not follow the path of noncompliance? How do we avoid the path that Saul took and all the people with him? Listen to me. This is indeed the question, and it is one of the more critical questions concerning the spiritual disease of disobedience. Here is why. Although Saul and the people were planning to disobey Elohim from the start, it is impossible to know if their noncompliance was premeditated or spontaneous. Trust me, there is a difference, a big difference. To wit, those who sin willfully will reap greater judgment, for their planning to transgress is deliberate and well thought out. On the other hand, those who sin inadvertently will reap greater mercies, for their planning is not intentional. Rather, their lack thereof is a byproduct of the spirit of complacency. To wit, they did not give the more earnest heed to ensuring their plans were aligned with Yahuwah's vision. In either case, the answer to the original question, i.e., avoiding the path of noncompliance, is sure. It is also crucial to your success, and thus I will offer it as an interest point. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. The only way to avoid the path of noncompliance is by making up your mind from the start to fulfill the vision the Father has revealed to you. After which, you must ensure your plans are aligned with his vision, and the summation of these matters reside in your heart. Daniel 1:8 is revealing, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the sovereign's food, nor with the wine which he drank. So he asked permission from the chief of the eunuchs not to defile himself. Here lies the key, my friends. Vis-a-vis, Daniel was able to establish purpose within his heart because he had already made up his mind to follow the vision, i.e., the will of Elohim. This is why Daniel asked the chief of the eunuchs for permission not to defile himself with the king's food and drink. This request confirms his plans were aligned with Elohim's vision from the start, and his vision came to pass. In the end, and after all, it always will. Not only this, but Daniel proves the same example of compliance years later when he was thrown into a lion's den. Like the earlier episode in his life, Daniel was committed to his purpose, which was to fulfill the will of Elohim, even in a foreign land. And his plans were aligned with that vision to the point where he was willing to be thrown into a lion's den. My dear friends, he was willing to die in order to live a life of purpose unto Elohim. When humility turns into insecurity. Now, unlike Daniel, Saul did not purpose in his heart to do the will of Elohim. Unlike Daniel, he was not committed to fulfilling his vision, even though Samuel had showed him the desire of Elohim concerning Amalek. And as I said before, it doesn't matter if his non-compliance was premeditated or not. The end result is the same. To wit, he disobeyed the commands of Elohim, and the people became his accomplices. This is why I prior emphasized how disobedience can be a deliberate refusal to follow the Father's will or a more subtle occasion of neglect. And thus, we must be on our guard to protect ourselves from both of these conduits of noncompliance. Along these lines, your best strategy is a potent offense. Vis-a-vis, you must be intentional about ensuring your plans are aligned with the vision of Elohim from the start. You must make it a standard operating procedure, i.e., it must be something you get into the habit of doing every day. If you don't, you will set yourself up to follow the path of noncompliance for the simple fact that you have intentionally or unintentionally given yourself the option not to comply. Ergo, the easiest path to victory on this wise is by taking that option off the table. To wit, don't even allow the path to noncompliance to be an option. Listen to me. This is where Saul messed up. Alas, he left the option of noncompliance on the table. He gave himself the option to spare King Agag. He gave himself the option to spare the best of the sheep and the cattle and the fatlings and the lambs and all that was good in his eyes. Now, I am drawing emphasis to the phrase in his eyes for a sure reason. Look here, this is a critical fault that is a key telltale concerning those who will eventually fall into noncompliance. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. The fact that Saul and the people perceived certain of the sheep, cattle, fatlings, and lambs were good is because their perspective was not aligned with the Father's perspective, i.e., their perspective was corrupted. It was off. We know this because Elohim commanded Saul to kill all the livestock, sparing none. And thus, we conclude none of these were good in the eyes of Elohim. And yet, they were good in the eyes of Saul and the people. And we know why. As it pertains to Saul, it is because his perspective had been compromised by despair. Now, the question we should chiefly entertain is, why was Saul being plagued by despair? The answer is sure, and you will have to invest some time studying the life of Saul as I have to find it. Alas, the sad truth is that Saul was very insecure about himself from the very start. And the truth is, he never completely overcame his insecurity. even after he was made king. This is why we find Samuel inquiring of him, saying, when you were little in your own eyes, were you not made the head of the tribes of Israel? This line reveals how Saul, once upon a time, had a very humble view of himself, which for all intents and purposes should have been to his great fortune and his great growth. And yet, it was not. Rather, it was to his great hurt. Here is why. Those who are meek by nature usually follow two paths. The good path is to stay humble and appreciate the Father for the success he allows you to incur, while always giving him esteem and praise for his many blessings. The other path is not so good, for on this path, your humility turns to insecurity. And instead of appreciating the Father for your success, you live in constant fear that this success will fade away and evil is waiting for you. It will eventually befall you. It is even at the doors. Trust me, our doubt diagrams confirm this matter. And so does Saul. Look, he testifies to his fears, saying, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the mouth of Yahuwah and your words, because I feared the people and listened to their voice. Can you believe this? Saul, the first king of Israel, and a man to be feared by the people, transgressed the commands of Elohim because he was afraid of the people. Alas, he feared those who are supposed to fear him. Now, the question is simply, why? Why did he fear the people? Here again, we already know the answer. It's because he was insecure. As I mentioned before, his humility turned to insecurity, which caused him to live in constant fear. Listen to me. This is why he was constantly trying to kill David. It is because the thing that he had feared the most had manifested itself in his life. To wit, as Saul constantly feared he would lose the kingdom, the thing he feared became his reality. David, a man who Elohim had anointed to succeed Saul while Saul was yet living, became his reality. This is one of the many reasons why we are taught not to fear. For fear is one of several emotions that will set in motion the self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is no mystery, for yourself manipulates your emotions to manipulate your reality. Ergo, the self-fulfilling prophecy is not some great happening or occasion. Quite the contrary, it is one of the many consequences of doubt. This self-fulfilling prophecy then evolves into disobedience, non-compliance to be precise. And thus, instead of aligning your plans to be in line with the vision of Elohim, you will create new plans that reflect your tainted perspectives and your worst fears. Now, here is the final word. Thy word have I hidden in my heart, such that I and thy word should never part. I may be getting ahead of myself a bit, but it is important for you to understand, even now, that there is a correlation between what is in your mind and what is in your heart. To wit, your heart is a melting pot containing, amongst other things, the contents of your mind. Therefore, if you do not transform and cleanse your mind, you will never be able to transform and cleanse your heart. It is a non starter. This is why we must finish the job we started when we initiated our reign over doubt. For the mind is not yet free. For lo, if we fail to gain the victory over disobedience, there will yet be a rebel inside of you and inside of me. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 365, How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 2. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 366, How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 3. I will post this podcast on Monday, November 4th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.